screen disappears.
Yeah, we're live. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Cara Romano, and I would like to welcome you all to today's webinar, Connection's latest Connectors Conversation Panel, a web discussion designed to bring thought-provoking perspectives and brilliant protagonists together around a timely topic to cultivate community growth. We appreciate your participation. I would especially like to thank ProBook's March Madhouse video competition for their support in sponsoring this event. This is the second piece of our two-part series on the digital workplace. Last month's discussion focused on global talent, and today's conversation is all about operations. We'll talk about the digitization of manufacturing and the supply chain with an emphasis on automation and robotics. Our conversation will bring together unique perspectives on operational transformations, which in many cases were already in progress, but they were definitely accelerated by the pandemic. We'll also talk about insights into new technologies, economic planning considerations, and more. So we have three speakers joining us to connect the dots, and although they have very different responsibilities and backgrounds, I think you'll be amazed at the common threads. To start, each of them will provide a few comments about a key issue, and then I'm going to step back and let them chat. So we may have time for a short Q&A at the end, so if you have questions, please use the comment function on YouTube. If we don't get to everything, or if you've got something you want to ask afterwards, we can follow up with you within 24 hours. Okay, so our brilliant speakers. Our first speaker will be Prashant Yadav, who is a senior fellow at the Center for Global Development, a professor at INSEAD, and a lecturer at Harvard Medical School. He advises governments and private sector companies on healthcare supply chains. Our second speaker will be John Janenda, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Uniform Advantage, a vertically integrated specialty retailer, where he is driving a 300% increase in revenue by optimizing existing fulfillment functions and developing new capabilities in manufacturing, offshore business process support, and B2B sales. He's a tech-savvy executive leader who has previously led supply chain projects for iconic brands like Reebok and Gap Inc. Last but not least, Matthew Lawrence has spent 25 years creating value from enterprise data and industrial companies like SMC Pneumatics and Wabash National Semi-Trailers, and consumer products companies, including Johnson & Johnson, Adidas, and Delta Faucet. He continues to lead digital transformations through his firm Stage One Analytics and as the managing director for Purdue University's Carnegie Center for Business Analytics and Machine Learning. So with those introductions, I want to thank you all again for attending, and let's get going. Okay, so Prashant, let's start with you. I want to start with the big picture. So what are the economic implications of the transition to digital operations? And there's got to be an impact on global trade.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. So I think we've got to go back in time a little bit and ask the question, global operations, what drove them to become global in the form that they currently are, right? What drives the economic geography of operations the way we see them now? And of course, we'll see the tremendous impact that the container has had, or quicker transport has had, in being able to bring containers from far away locations, and that forcing us to think about, can I locate a part of my operational node in Asia or somewhere else in Latin America? But the part that we oftentimes don't take into account is global operations have also been driven by the way we can exchange information with those who are outside the immediate boundaries of our operation, whether it's a warehouse, a manufacturing site, a planning center. We can now do that function in a much more distributed sense, and our ability to collaborate with suppliers, manufacturers, planning people, design people who are located everywhere in the world has become different. And that's also led to the emergence of clusters of knowledge. And the nature of knowledge that resides in those clusters, so whether it is medical device manufacturing in northern Italy, or shoe and apparel, sports apparel manufacturing in southern Bavaria, or parts in China, which have become very good at making certain types of components and medical devices, or locations in India, which are very good at making some generic pharmaceuticals, right? So over time, it's not about labor cost advantage. It has evolved into core tacit knowledge that starts to reside in this cluster. And so far, we've sort of accepted the fact that, well, that's tacit knowledge. That's not something that we can exchange using digital channels. But where we are headed now is the fact that you can convert some of this tacit knowledge that resides in knowledge clusters through the use of advanced algorithmic methods. And that's, in a way, the driving force for where we are headed next. And I think it's important to look at it in this context versus just thinking about, well, trade is causing a decoupling. Trade is what got us to global operations, and trade is what is taking us back. Yes, there is a strong tailwind that trade gives in both, or can give in both directions. But I think the underlying economic reasons, which have been driven by the cost of exchanging information of different types, not just data, but information of very rich nature between companies' operational nodes, is what has driven us to where we are and can take us to an even newer level of global operations.
Perfect. So we're going to come back to that, because I want to tell you, it's really a shift in value from labor, which was our focus, to information. So that's something that our other two speakers certainly have a lot to say about. So we'll come back to you, Prashant. Thank you for that introduction. Okay, John, as the non-academic on the panel, who is currently actually running an operation and using drones to take inventory, and help us understand really what's really working, how you're approaching automation versus robotics. What's the difference between the two?
Oh, thank you, Kara. I think it's a super interesting conversation, and while Prashant and I have not spoken at length on the topic before, I think there's an interesting connection between his concept of knowledge being sort of localized in geographical regions, and how that contributes or changes the paradigm in which you are able to get work done. I think when it comes to, if I extrapolate that and think about that in the terms of the automation concept, we have found a couple of things in our past life, touring the country looking for solutions for our operations, both as a COO and as a consultant. You find lots of facilities out there that have built monstrous amounts of metal structure around their operation to be conveyorized pick-pack modules, or ASRS, or tilt tray sortation systems, and they're fantastic for their design concept. But often in these facilities, if you're there 2 or 3 years after they were installed, you find that they have become a constraint on the facility's ability to grow. And so you find all kinds of weird exceptions, like a guy on a forklift is picking a single pair of socks out of a box 35 feet in the air because they ran out of the space in their facility to be able to handle things the way that they originally anticipated. So in our approach to automation, we are doing everything that we can to not bolt things to the ground, to try and leverage I think the really cool thing about the robotics opportunities is that you have the ability to have the device move in the facility freely and bring work to people or accompany people to do work. So there have been some neat components about that. One of the things that, again, leveraging off of what Prashant said, I think is interesting, is that it feels to me like the early opportunities in this field have been focused on, let me create a machine that can do this task really well. I see this task happening in a warehouse, and I'm going to create a machine that will do that task well. I'm going to pick a thing out of a tote. I'm going to distinguish between round things and square things and soft things and hard things. Or I'm going to bring a cardboard box to a person who can pick the units out. Or I'm going to follow somebody along and anticipate where they're going to be. Those are all really cool things that we've developed that machines can do. I think the next iteration for this industry, and I think where they're sometimes struggling to demonstrate ROI, is in how do we do that in the changing dynamic of the volume of a given facility on any day in which everything changed from 4 hours ago. You have hundreds of thousands of things that you're trying to accomplish, and the software and the algorithms that will help you figure out how to do that efficiently with or without a machine, I think there's still an opportunity for that. You mentioned the drone in particular for doing inventory control and cycle counting. our operation sells 100,000 different products. And so the idea of having inventory discrepancies is extremely disruptive to both our operation and our customers. So we thought having a drone fly through the warehouse, be able to take digital images of barcodes and then tell us what's there and what isn't there would be phenomenal. And so we've partnered with a company and we're exploring that. And I can tell you that it's been 7 months off and on of exploring and making progress in fits and starts. And there are some definite challenges. The drone can absolutely take pictures of everything that we have in our facility. But can it understand which barcode is the one that it needs to read? Can it know what to do with the exceptions around it? And, simple things that a human would look at and say, this barcode was supposed to be in this location. It's in this location. Well, the inventory control person knows, okay, I'll just switch the location. The software today is giving us two things that we now have to go investigate with humans, as opposed to just saying, I can make that switch for you, don't worry about it. I think that's certainly coming, but right now it feels like the industry is very good at doing a task without necessarily understanding all of the underlying components of the operation. And it definitely makes me think about the stuff that Prashant is saying, where you have very localized knowledge, and how do you get that localized knowledge to the people who actually have to execute the work successfully.
Right. There's a difference between, like you said, picking up something and putting it someplace, and some of the more advanced processing that the human is actually doing. I guess that's the difference between automation and robotics. Okay, so speaking of that, we come to Matthew. See, this all makes sense. So all of this automation generates data. So when you were CIO, you used to drive business performance using all that data. In fact, when we were talking last week or the week before, you said data is a raw material, and I love that. So help us understand the importance of data to the digital workplace, building on what John just said.
Yeah, thanks, Kara. And it's pleasure to be here, and good to pick up off of what John was just saying there. Yeah, and as a CIO, as a responsibility, I always also said that the most important word of my title was the I out of the CIO, the information aspect of it. Technology wasn't in there. It was all about how I could create, maintain, protect, and utilize those information assets that are being generated, procured, or however acquired through the daily operations of the business. So how do we put them to work? And it's really, so I looked at it as data as a raw material. It's an output of some process, but it's how to recreate that and put that back as an input into improving those processes overall. So whether it's in the design of new products, building intelligence, or building application software into physical products that could be utilized to generate more data. Products now have sensors in them. They have software associated with them. It's not just a piece of metal or some part moving. It's how to pick up the data off of those moving parts. It's not just material being handled and pushed around a warehouse and out to the shipping dock and now off to the customer, but it's capturing data throughout that cycle, that process, so that you can learn more. Every process is an opportunity. There's data there. The question is whether you're capturing that or not. And any lost opportunity is just costing you the opportunity to make improvements in those areas. Supply chain, how you procure, building supply chains, using that data to build supply chains that are more efficient, more robust, and more resilient is how that data could be used, so that you're not subject to strikes on the ports in California, or stricken by weather conflicts, or any social political issues that may occur. How do you build a supply chain off the data that you've learned, and build predictive models that allow you to more adaptive build your supply chains to the current conditions? The warehousing automations and some of those things are help support that as well, because these robotics and automations that are put into these are more adaptable now than ever as well. But the same thing goes for manufacturing. Manufacturing processes utilizing robotics and additive manufacturing and 3D printing allows you to move the location of where things are built and procured as well. And really putting data across all of those, so that it's not just you're improving one aspect, you're not just in isolation improving the product or improving the supply chain or improving manufacturing, as well as the sales and marketing process for that matter, but is the integration across all of those so that your sales and marketing functions are actually feeding in the product design, the manufacturing process are feeding into the product design, and vice versa. So it's a fully integrated up and down value chain of using that data in multiple ways throughout to extract value and to make it part of a corporate competency. And so the old days of IT just being building the systems to transact the business, it's really how do you get the data out of the business to be able to put it back into use throughout the value chain.
Okay, great. You guys all kind of danced around a few, I'll call them buzzwords, but the word agility, nobody actually used that word, but you all kind of talked about it. So I'm just curious if agility is driving all these digital transformations that we've been talking about. And honestly, we've been talking about them for what, a decade, 2 decades? Other than COVID, which is probably something we ought to talk about. What's changed? So why all of a sudden is the digital workplace? Is it because we had forced to do it? So what has changed in the last year or two to really kind of push this as a bigger issue and as something that companies really view as a have to do as opposed to nice to have? Who wants to take that first?
Well, I mean, I think, Kara, if I can, for the at the lowest level of operational concern, you have a tremendous amount of constraint on your labor, upward pressure for price, more people competing for the same type of labor, the proliferation of folks like Amazon in the world where they're looking to sort of fill that same sort of labor position that we would be looking to fill, has put a premium on being able to do things as efficiently as possible and with as few people as possible, because they're just really hard to get. Even in great labor markets, you are struggling to find all the resources that you need. I would say that absolutely the conditions of the last 12 months have made it imperative that you have a backup strategy and that it becomes your primary strategy going forward to be able to have a balanced reliance on labor that can withstand changes in labor supply so that you're able to continue to meet your customer needs and keep your business running.
And the supply chain disruptions, and Matt just talked about supply chain disruptions, the strikes at the port, but it's also a pandemic where it's, the people shortage, yes, which kind of changes the dynamic, but you can't get any materials, right? So it's kind of which comes first, the chicken or the egg.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kara, to add to what John said, I think if you take the analogy of, data is the new oil, then in the last decade, yes, we have been talking a lot about how can we use data to bring agility, how can we use it to bring faster, better decision-making occur in different operational functions, supply chain, manufacturing, distribution, warehousing. But we were still at the stage of drilling and exploration in the last 10 years. Only now have we really found where to drill. We figured out the way to drill. And now we are getting to the stage of refining and then being able to distribute what comes out of that across functions within operations. And that's when the true movement of data contributing to decision-making, faster, better, agility will start. So, and I think one thing I want to remind us is that while we talk about, the use of very sophisticated algorithms and data and how far we've come in this journey in private companies, what we've realized in COVID-19, whether it's vaccine distribution, medicines, or masks, is that we've got to do something to bring government and their ability to use data to have the same kind of agility and the same use of robotics and automation and machine learning and all of the things that we talk about. Because if they are not able to use this technology, then we will continue to face situations like, well, everything that comes up to the port of Los Angeles or Long Beach is driven by immensely well-functioning data. Everything that happens after the truck picks it up from the port has got IoT sensors sitting on it. But that what happens in between those two layers is a complete black box with very little data, with very little agility. So I think that's just a plea to make sure that we don't forget that in order to succeed, there will be functions, whether it is drug regulation, port management, which will be carried out by the public sector. And we've got to bring the public sector along in their ability to drill for data, refine it, distribute it for decision making, etc.
Matt, given your kind of balance both public and the private, is the technology advanced to the point where it can do all of these things that we're talking about? And is the private sector that much further ahead? How do we get everybody on the level playing field?
Well, I think that's a hard question, that part of it, as far as how to get everybody on a level playing field. As far as the technology there, yes, I firmly believe that the computing power, the ability to handle the data that we're talking about now, is already a point to solve many of those problems, and people are looking at it in terms of, I use the word resilient supply chains, and I think that's what you're trying to optimize in that process with the data that's currently there, and looking outside of your organization and at a lot of external and macroeconomic and other factors that could affect that. I think that's already taking place now. However, I think what really changes that, and you'll see the companies that step ahead will be the ones that design product where it may be, where you can actually have the even more adaptive supply chain. So not just optimizing what we currently have and navigate all of the risks that are associated with that, but actually products that become more innovative, that aren't that have more intelligence built in, and allow you to source them locally or more adaptively, more quickly. And yeah, I think just being able to, the whole process of the design of the products, the supply chain and the manufacturing processes will open up new opportunities to mitigate some of those risks, and then you'll see a whole different flow of the products and associated information. So the more you know how your product is consumed and utilized, and the performance and maintained, thinking about engines, thinking about chips, and thinking about computer parts, thinking about consumer products, because they're putting technology on shoes now, or on everything in cars, obviously. So the more you learn about that, then the more you can really understand how to source and manufacture and build a resilient and efficient operations to support that product.
Let's talk about change management for a second, because it's something that when I was talking to all of you in preparation for this call, you all brought up. So how do we get people to realize that in order for that to happen, in order for that those investments to pay off and for us to get more efficient, we need to actually understand that there's data that needs to be generated, that needs to be captured. Do people trust that data? Do they therefore trust when there's when there's AI or ML behind the scenes generating predictions and making decisions? Do people trust the outcome if they don't trust the data, or if they're unwilling to participate in the data capture to begin with? So help us understand the adoption and the change management issues.
So I think, Kara, that I agree with that being a significant challenge. The limited experience that I've had with trying to get people on board to accept that data that you are collecting is accurate is hampered by the fact that usually the collection process itself takes lots of fits and starts to get correct. You go through lots of iterations where you're being told that, this is the data. You've asked for the data, here's the data. And then you have a human set of eyes on it that works in an operation or in the industry, and takes 10, 15 minutes to look through it and finds 3, 4, 5 major flaws. And that kind of thing sort of sets the process back. And I think it, I don't know how Prashant and Matt feel about this, but the challenge that I consistently have in operations is helping the technologists, the people who have the math and science background and the brains to be able to make the AI and the machine learning execute don't always fully appreciate or understand the nuance of the operation. And so the results that they produce don't necessarily resonate with businesses being logical or consistent with what they were asking for. So I'm curious how, in your pursuits, you find, do you find that to be a problem, and how have you seen people effectively overcome that type of problem?
Prashant, you want to start with that one?
Matt, please start. I'll follow you.
He's really talking about that translation between IT and the business and business and IT, right? So how do you get people to understand going back and forth? It goes both ways, right?
Well, having grew up supposedly through the ERP adoption and where IT was becoming a function, an actual function of a business, that was at least had a position at the table, so to speak. I think this is similar, but even more advanced in the sense of utilizing the information. IT was there to support the backbone of the transactional processing of the companies. And now we're talking about this intelligence and scientists that are involved in the design and the engineering of the products and designing models that support, functions that have existed, that were core to a business for years. And now you're saying that you need some mathematics and science and data scientists behind it to survive, in essence, in this day and age, that it's integrated within those operations now. And so now I can't just be an engineer. I need to be an engineer and a data scientist. I can't just be a supply chain planner. I need to at least understand how those algorithms are designed and put to use and what the inputs are into them, more importantly, than using the spreadsheet that's been passed around for the last 20 years. And replacing these very laborious and delayed and process of sales and operation planning, that's based upon a lot of institutional knowledge and tacit knowledge that was shared, explained before, and that all that is more of an AI machine learning model that's supporting the process. I think we're still at a point where you need that human involvement, but it's artificial intelligence supporting the human intelligence, and then those working together, and not necessarily replacing one or the other. As far as getting there, there has to be that integration. There has to be the recognition of it as the first part. Acceptance and acknowledgement is the first part of it. That data is all. My business is managing data, and how I utilize it and how I integrate it within all of the core functions of the company is going to determine how I succeed in the long run. And so what skills now are required for that, knowing that I have to manage and manipulate that information and integrate it within those functions.
Yeah. Are humans getting replaced, right? It's kind of a sliding scale. So that's another issue with this adoption, with the trust factor is this data or is this piece of equipment going to take my job?
Yeah, I think it's humans are getting replaced with other humans in a large regard with different skill sets in some of this. So it'll take time, but I think it's in process, and you can see which companies benefit from the most from it. I mean, it shows up on the balance sheets in terms of the multiples of the valuations of these companies. The ones who have adopted it tend to have a much higher valuation, so that not only shows that the data is a raw material, but the information is an asset.
Yeah.
So one thing I'll add to that, Kara, is that I think the way the IT function evolved, and Matt has seen this as he's describing, was initially it was, we're trying to solve a business problem, but then in an organizational structure and design sense, there is a chief information officer, there is an IT function which gets its own capital expenditure budget, which it makes and then justifies the returns to the financial executives. But if we go down the same path with data and analytics and data science, I think it will be a grave mistake, in my opinion. So there are companies which are creating the role of chief analytics officer or chief data science officer, right? And that goes to what John was asking, because people do want the help of the data scientists, the people who can, do clever things with data, but they don't want them to come from someone who sits in a central corporate role. They want them to come from someone who's embedded in their team. right? Every functional team which is doing operational work wants to say, oh, here is our guy or gal who's going to help solve our problems with data, and we'll take the spreadsheet and generate some magic for us from it. And that's the part they like. But when it comes to them from the chief data officer's function, then there is more inertia and resistance to it. So I think organizational design needs to think about this very, very carefully to overcome some of the inertia and the barriers. The second thing is that COVID and many other things are becoming forcing functions where there was some inertia in the past, right? So one function that I talk about very often is people used to go and do supplier audits without the use of as much digital infrastructure as is available. You sit on a plane, sometimes you take a large part of your supplier audit team, you go and visit your supplier in an international location, and that's the only way we knew of how to do supplier audits. Mm-hmm. Technology firms were coming and saying, look, you can do it with AR and VR today. You can do it with many other things. No one was buying it because, yeah, it was human nature. We used to like to go and meet the supplier and have a handshake and do things with them. But now the forcing function that we cannot travel has gotten us to a level where we do supplier audits. Not only do we do it in private companies, even government regulators regulate suppliers by doing virtual audits. And those are things which are going to stay with us. So I think the convergence of how we organize the data and the analytics function and some sort of, tailwind coming from, whether in this case it was COVID or other things which can act as forcing functions, who jointly are going to get us very quickly in the domain where we always wanted to be.
But because of the talent shortages, we've been talking about talent shortages in supply chain for a long time. And lately we've been talking about talent shortages in this AI ML world. So how does John take his planners that do have that corporate knowledge, that tacit knowledge, and how do we inject the capabilities into the process or into the governance of an organization so that they also have the data understanding and can work with those kind of models? How do we balance the two? Or is that the magic bullet?
Well, I think Prashant made a great point about the greater the distance between the source of the data. If it's coming from the chief data scientist, or in other words, if it's coming from a discrete IT operation that is disconnected from the daily business folks, I think that you have a greater degree of skepticism from the end consumers and a greater degree of there being a likelihood of error in the data because of the lack of connection between the folks producing it and the folks using it. I think organizational management or organizational structure is an excellent point Prashant makes in terms of how you try to integrate data experts into each and every facet of the operation so that you have people connected to the end user community and to the technology and the data. And I'm, maybe in this case, I would rely on the academics on the call to help us figure out how we're getting more, what are we seeing out there in terms of education and generating that kind of knowledge in the workplace so that, that's a more likely opportunity for us to be able to hire folks like that. Are they, and maybe this is off topic, but are they coming from traditional academic arenas, or are we also seeing that they come from sort of non-traditional, atypical places, Google educational opportunities, or online college opportunities, or the MOOCs, or things like that?
Right. Is it solved generationally as millennials and my kids that have grown up with technology, the digital natives, right? So is it going to evolve just because those kids are used to doing this kind of analysis and having this data at their fingertips? Or the universities still have a huge role to play in training from the ground up?
Well, I think at Purdue University, where I'm also involved as a managing director for this Carnegie Center for Business Analytics and Machine Learning, and Purdue overall has an initiative called the Integrative Data Science Initiative, which was set up at the institute, at the organizational level, to ensure that there was a data science component, some data literacy involved in every program in the institution. So it doesn't matter if you're in nursing or an engineer or in agriculture, life sciences, business or whatever, you are going to have some component of
That's great.
related to data literacy, if you will, and some more than others. I think, yes, there is a trend. Obviously, you're going to see more majors. Purdue also had the first computer science program in the country 3 decades ago, but it's huge now. It's not a class coming through. It's a large school, college now. Just the pure numbers are there, driven by the need, the salaries, if you will. I mean, it's certainly attractive to go down that path. You'll see all different shapes and sizes of computer scientists, though, as well, which I think is needed. They don't all need to be code jockeys, but it's just this whole proliferation of this environment of the next talent wave. And it'll be, I think it is, again, talking about how to, the centralized function supporting it. I think you're going to see the awareness and that's coming from the engineers that are graduating, from the College of Engineering. They're going to have an appreciation and understanding of how data supports them. So if there is a mathematician or a computer scientist or a statistician, they're also going to know how to work with them. So at the ConneCXi Center, we are engaging with companies that's what we do. We bring, the goal is to bring an interdisciplinary team to solving these companies' problems and data challenges, complex data challenges. Could be in the operations area and supply chain, could be in preventative maintenance and using an integration of AI and digital imaging processing, but all with some sort of data analytics or algorithmic function behind supporting those core functions. So it is getting students actually also into the workforce before they graduate, that they're going to be game ready. But we also have a function where a lot of times when we engage with these companies, not only do they want access to the younger talent that's gaining their degrees in these functions, but they're also wanting us to re-educate and retrain some of their workforce as well. And we have certificate programs and other things like that to help companies transition their workforce from their original functions into a data scientist of some sort.
So one thing I would add to this, Kara, is that I think we hear a lot of conversation about we don't have a sufficient pool of data science talent. And I think we've got to separate that into, is it the total number of people that are coming out of the pipeline of whether it is getting produced in companies or in universities, or is it more about how they are getting distributed across functions within companies, right? So the challenge we face, once again, is about organizational design and what becomes accepted culture. So there are a lot of people who are graduating or have training and expertise in data science, but they all want to go and work for a data science team because they say, I want to be in a place where all my peers are as cool about using the machine learning model as I am. And you tell them, you'll get a unique opportunity to change something on the factory floor. You'll be the only person there who knows machine learning. There will be nobody else, but you will work wonders. And there are very few of them who take that because they think, oh, that's not cool. And that's where I think we've got to collectively change the culture, and whether it'll happen generationally or in what way, I don't know. So that a data scientist says, I'm going to be learning richer, more impactful things if I go and work in John's operational setup and help them solve these really cool problems. We've got to reward them, not just about monetary reward, but reward them in terms of making senior executives understand that the career paths that need to be promoted are not the ones who sit their entire career at the data science team at Google, but the ones who actually work in John's team and create something that not only John and his company can use, but everybody who's in that business can use. And that's something that needs to come from the top.
Yeah, I can tell you that I have not won an interview where the candidate is looking at me and at Google at the same time. They're not choosing me. But
so when you said it has to come from the top, is that the top of John's organization, or where does that cultural change start? Because that's a shift, and all these kids, they want to work at Google or Facebook, or the Microsoft. They want to work at those companies that are known for having those kinds of that kind of leadership role, but they can have a bigger impact.
A conversation and having come from the corporate side, but being on the other side now, looking into companies as well, having heard that we're a data-driven company, I like to put them to the test and ask, are you really? Is data actually driving your company? Or are you just putting lip service to that? Are there people in positions that are creating value with the data that can override the decisions by the tenured executive that knows how the company is run? So, can they at least put them on peer level and working side by side? So is the data really driving the company, or do the people like to use the data to support the decisions that they want to make? And that means that there's a team of people that are creating the value out of that data, that there's the data being generated in the company, and it's identifying opportunities and significant changes that can reinvent that company with the outputs, what the data is saying.
But to Prashant's point from earlier, it can't just be a central data science group. It needs to be within the operational group, the boots on the plant, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit about the robotics because, John, we talked a little bit about the drones flying around and taking inventory, and Prashant talked about having digital supplier audits. What other business processes are really prime for this kind of activity? Where should companies be focused in their supply chains? Which processes should be automated? Which processes lend themselves to robotics? With the caveat, hey, we want to be agile. As you said earlier, I don't want to bolt the conveyor belts to the floor. I want to be able to move them around, and so my company can grow. So, what processes have you seen be most successful, or which are really ripe for this kind of technology approach?
I think our opportunities where we've tried to focus is the activities that take the most time and add the least value to the customer or to the process. And a huge one in most operations is travel time. There's no benefit to the customer that I walked 13 miles to pick products today, or if I walked 1 mile to pick products. That adds nothing to the process. So to the extent that you can reduce those type of activities across the supply chain, I think there's benefit. And in some regards, the things that Matt was talking about can I produce for the same price in a more geographically desirable location by using a different method? Can I 3D print stuff on demand, or can I, can I send a pattern to a laser cutter that's now going to cut clothes in a warehouse in New York because it doesn't matter, it only needs to take up this much space. It doesn't need to be done overseas where labor and real estate are so much less expensive. Those are the places where I think we're finding the opportunities. I think we're still some distance away on a lot of them, but that's the type of focus that we're trying to take into the process today.
Matt, can you follow up with that? And we had talked a little bit about additive manufacturing. I think that's probably appropriate to bring up here.
Well, yeah, it's that process in general, and from the design to the manufacturing pieces is that cycle can be shortened from the design process, the prototyping, the manufacturing, and the testing of that process can be so much shortened with the technologies that we have today that are supported by the data that's there for those processes. So the more that it's starting somewhere, and if that's a place for your company to start, it's a great opportunity in looking at that, how the understand that fully integrated design to manufacturing process.
Okay, I want to wrap up, but before I do, I want to ask each of you just to provide one piece of advice. So for a company or a government organization who is really looking to leverage data, leverage analytics, leverage robotics, take a look at automation, what one piece of advice would you give them to really help them on their road to success? So Prashant, can we start with you?
Yeah, I would say pick some non-obvious places, right? Don't go after low-hanging fruit in terms of, labor efficiency or other things. Go after something bigger, because no matter whether you pick low-hanging fruit or something that is harder, it is going to take time. There'll be inertia, there'll be change management. So pick something bigger. And when I say bigger, I mean areas in decision-making where human biases come in and make the decision quality poorer. Let's go after them, whether it's in the sales and operations planning process, where for decades we've been trying to make it occur in the right manner, but we can't because the sales forecasts have a bias in them and we can never match it. Let's try to bring more objectivity with data science in such functions. And yes, it'll be harder than just doing robotic procurement or purchasing automation. That is the easier task. But let's go after the bigger things. That would be my advice.
Okay, great. Matt?
Well, maybe two things go together there. Is kind of what Prashant was saying was, as I say, start, get going. I mean, use your data, listen to your data, but do find an area that you can start in, and find an area again that it's not just tweaking what you have. And I think that's where Prashant was going. Find an area where you can actually see the impact and how it can really have a multiplier effect on what those processes are. But the data is there. Find what data you have and find out how you can put it to use. But get started.
Okay, and John?
I think the biggest challenge that we're facing, and the thing that I would encourage people to do, is that when you're out looking for a technology solution, automation solution, that you're incredibly cognizant of the fact that you have to pair it with operational expertise that is at a similar intellectual level, so that you are getting a quality end product that actually delivers an ROI. I think for some reason, throughout our conversation over the last week or so, I keep thinking of 20 years ago, there was a commercial for IBM where there was a seasoned operations guy sitting in his office talking to a hotshot up and coming web developer. And the web developer is showing him his application, and the old seasoned guy says, what I'd really love is a system that could look at my inventory across all of my channels and tell me where everything was at every time, and keep my customers appraised of where their orders were, so that I didn't have to take phone calls in my contact center, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the web developer's eyes sort of explode with, I can make your logo blink and flash. I think that some of the automation and robotic stuff today is still in that phase where it can blink and flash. It can do some really cool things, and it can create a cool YouTube video, but can it run your operation every single day and create a long-term ROI for you for the investment that you're putting into it? So pair your operational expertise with your technology expertise so that you get a really solid solution.
Right. So it's not just technology for technology's sake. We hear that mantra all the time, but so you're actually solving a business problem. So thank you. Okay. So speaking about Purdue, before we end, I want to congratulate Matt on the Purdue Boilermakers basketball team competing in the NCAA March Madness tournament in Indianapolis. And I also want to thank ProBook Sports, who is our sponsor, and urge everybody to check out the ProBook March Madhouse viral video competition. I also want to thank our panelists. I want to thank Matt Lawrence, John Janenda, and Prashant Yadav. The conversation has really been fascinating. I appreciate it. So follow Connection on LinkedIn for more information about participating in our community, about making custom connections and impacting these conversations. So watch the Connection LinkedIn page for information about our next session, which will be focused on new approaches to brand building through digital marketing and social media. That one's going to kind of be very different from what we're talking about today. A replay of today's conversation will be available on our website, and we'll be posting summaries of our speakers' perspectives. So thanks everybody for your participation, and stay safe.